how to adopt a raw food diet, how to change your diet to a healthier diet, how to eat more raw foods into your daily life, what is the best percentage of carbohydrates, proteins, and fats, how to apply the raw food, vegan or even vegan diet into your lifestyle. Let's talk a little bit more about nutrition, diet, health, and raw foods. Hi, I'm Dr. Corassa, a clinical nutritionist that have been living in a raw food diet and a natural hygiene lifestyle for almost 2 decades now. So not just I study in university and also outside writing books, etc., but I also live, teach, preach a raw food diet. A lot of people, when trying to change to a raw food diet or when trying to get their diet better, make several, dozens, maybe hundreds of mistakes because they don't know the science behind it and they also don't know how to apply it. So in this lecture, we will be making simpler, easier to see the goal and how to apply it. But for sure, there's a lot of things to learn and we cannot teach in 1 hour. So if you want to learn more with me, and because we also don't have sponsors for the channel, I highly recommend the 10 books that I published, but only 2 until now are translated to English, and they are both available on Amazon. Hygienic Fasting Nature Surgery is available also on print on demand and in Kindle. Natural Delicacy and Cooking Without a Stove is only on Kindle yet. But I have a lot of other books published. I'm a nutritionist, so I offer nutrition consultations. I run raw food retreats here in Brazil where I live, and I also have online courses that all will be translated to English, but until now, even the retreat, you can come and have the lectures translated to you in English. If you want to support the channel, if you like the content and you want to see more of it, you can go to Amazon, acquire one of the books. I can guarantee you that this is the most updated and comprehensive fasting book in the world right now. But I also can help you to tailor the raw food diet to your nutritional needs. Let's understand a little bit more about the science. So I love quotes, and as Dennis Burkitt once said, the guy that discovered the importance of of fiber to our microbiome, to our health, the frying pan you should give to your enemy. Food should not be prepared in fat. Our bodies are adapted to a Stone Age diet of roots and vegetables. I wouldn't say roots, I would say fruits and vegetables, and nuts and seeds and other foods. But he was right on the idea. He caught the idea, this is probably in the 80s, maybe more than 40 years ago, and he was already suggesting what nobody was suggesting, that we are eating too much junk food, we are eating too much animal products, and that is not good for our health. So quoting the Bhagavad Gita, religious men eat what the forces of nature offer, but those atheists cooking good food sin when they eat it. The Hindu religious text. It's not a modern concept that cooking is bad for our health. If you take a look, there's actually pretty much 3 ways to look at raw foods. There is the living food diet, that is the most common one, the most famous one. They base themselves on sprouting grains, legumes, nuts and seeds. They believe that the sprouting makes the seed 100 times, 1,000 times more nutritious, and that would be the perfect way to become more healthier. I don't think it makes any sense, because making 1,000 more nutritious so you become Superman or something like that, it's not like that in the science and into the real world. For sure, nuts and seeds can be sprouted, and that would be good for us because the nutrients will become more bioavailable, it will become easier to digest. Some stuff cannot be eaten raw, like chickpeas or lentils, etc. If it's already dried, yeah, for sure. I believe in sprouting some stuff, and I don't think it's detrimental. But is it our natural diet? Could you be on a living food diet in nature without dehydrators, blenders, bowls, big jars to sprout the seeds? For sure not. So, and even more, the raw food living diets, they use oils, they use agave, xylitol, they use a lot of stuff that is actually maybe raw, but it's not whole. So that is one point that people misunderstand about the raw food diet. A raw food diet must be made of primarily or exclusively of fresh foods. For sure, do I eat chickpeas? Do I eat nuts and seeds that may be dry? Yes, for sure. But what is the amount? And do I eat oils? Do I eat any kind of refined food that you cannot find in nature? No way. So that is the main concept that people make the mistakes when going to raw food diets. Not understanding that whole food should be the norm. For sure, a lot of people talk about whole food plant-based diet, but how whole can be a food after it's being cooked? The food is not whole after being cooked. You have to realize that is quite simple. When you cook the food, you lose the water and you change a lot of the nutrients. You lose a lot of the micronutrients and you change the macronutrients. You cause damage on that. So when cooking, the food is not whole anymore. But also when refining the food is not raw anymore, because people thinking raw food diet, not just raw, uncooked, but also as a whole food, as a natural food. So that is probably one of the main mistakes of the raw living food diet, using a lot of preparation and a lot of processed food. Even though oil is not seen as processed food for many people, it's not whole. There's no olive oil tree, right? And the second part is my criticism to the raw living food diet is that they eat a lot, but a lot of fat. What we know, and we are going to talk about still in this lecture, about the 80-10-10 concept. So what the research has been showing is that we are made for a diet high in carbohydrates, low in fat. If you take a look at fat in nature, it's really hard to assess it. It's really hard to get it. And there's a lot more carbohydrates available than fats available. For example, imagine how much fruits there is in the planet, how much vegetables there are in the planet, but how many nuts and seeds and fatty fruits, how many fat food sources there are in the planet? Dozens? I know at least 20, maybe 30, 40 nuts and seeds that would be eatable, but I can remember at least 100, 200 fruits besides maybe 50, 100 vegetables. And we're not even counting tubers, legumes, grains, and a lot of other stuff. So the plant kingdom is always based on carbohydrates instead of fats. Fats is like once in a while we would be able to get it, find a tree, and nuts and seeds are usually available in winter and autumn, the ones that we can easily eat and enjoy. At least nuts, only available on winter and autumn in the trees. Even avocados back then. Nowadays, they mix it so many species of avocados, having avocados almost the whole year. But if you think about it, avocados are usually from autumn and winter's food. So that are my main criticisms into the raw food living diet. But also, many people that start a raw food living diet, they not just forget about fruits because they fear fruits and a lot of other stuff, but they forget the healthful living and focus only on the diet part. And that's one of the main mistakes they make. So focusing on everything instead of just one thing, focusing on exercise, sleep, sunshine, chrononutrition, chronobiology, fasting, eating as much as you care for fresh carbohydrates like fruits and vegetables. That is the main goal, and not just like eat sprouted, It looks like more of a religion than science, applicable and something that works, because I have been around the raw food movement for almost 20 years. At least here in Brazil, everybody that I know that tried the living food diet, it's not only on the living food diet. They always jump off the wagon. They cannot maintain in the long run a raw food diet. That's why I truly believe that human beings are frugivore animals. If you want to understand more about it, I did a whole lecture, a whole podcast on it. I will be putting on the description. It's called The Diet of Eden, a frugivore diet, the Garden of Eden diet. It's here on the channel. It will elucidate, you will solve all your doubts about why we are frugivore animals. Having said that, there are some people that choose to include animal products even in a raw food diet or in a try veganism, and it doesn't work in the long run, so they maybe add some animal foods. With that being said, that's what we have to realize, because even primates in the wild maybe sometimes eat some insects. Chimps eat some meat once in a month. So there is still some debates about like what would be the best, like being vegan and supplementing or eating some animal products. I care about it in terms of animal welfare. I care about it in terms of environment. I care about it in terms of nutrition. But here we must talk about nutrition. And what we know is that a plant-based diet, and not an exclusively plant-based diet, would be the best for us. So what I always say is, independent of your choice, if you want to become a vegan or you don't want to become a vegan, or you're trying to be a vegan and not managing to stay vegan, still eating primarily plants is the goal. If you choose a raw food paleo diet, or if you choose a frugivore diet, including some animal products or not, you have to pay attention to B12. That's for sure. You have to supplement B12 if you're not ingesting animal products, and that would be my first commentary on the subject. I love this quote from Shelton. All the anatomical characteristics, the physiological, the biochemical of man would place him in the frugivore category. The number and the structure of its teeth, the size of his gastrointestinal system, the position of his eyes, the function of his skin, the characteristic of his saliva, the size of his liver, the number and the position of his mammary glands, the position and the structure of the sexual organs, the characteristic of the human placenta, and a lot of other factors would be testimonies of the fact that human beings are constituted as frugivorous animals. And I love that quote from Shelton. So the main focus, the main approach to raw food diets that I have seen it work for 20 years is frugivore diets, not a fruitarian diet. It's two different things, and we'll be talking about it. But a frugivore diet. And for sure, I would have to praise Dr. Douglas Graham for introducing the concept of the 80-10-10 and being actually the father of the frugivore movement, of the natural hygiene, modern hygiene diet. And I have to thank Doug, because almost 20 years ago, I read the 80-10-10 diet, and it saved my life and put me in this path that I actually helped millions of Brazilians to understand more about diet and nutrition and to be more motivated to make changes. So I have been thriving for 18 years in a raw food diet. So what is the main goal? If you want to make your diet better, eat more fruits and vegetables. Oh, Eduardo, but it's a raw food diet, a frugivore diet. That is not the main goal, in my humble opinion. Although I'm a raw foodist and I live on raw food. If you're not like, I want to be the purest and cleanest in the diet part, if you are focusing on health, you have to understand that diet is just one part of health. And if you're eating whole foods, fresh foods, primarily, you are way better off than almost everybody on the planet, and you may be even better off than people on raw food diets. Because if you don't forget to exercise vigorously, if you are always getting some sunshine and sleeping properly and paying attention to chrononutrition, chronobiology, stress, some time in nature, all of that will be important to become a better and healthier person. So we have to be real with the science and with the data. So as I say to my patients, Okinawa doesn't live to 100 for any kind of reason whatsoever. They even cook their food. 70% of their diet is not fruit, it's sweet potato. But still, they're the healthiest and longest living society on the planet. So for sure, if they were in a frugivore diet, I think they would be better. But still, raw foods is not the only answer to health, longevity, and diet. Because you can see as the living food, raw food movement, they only focus on sprouts and they forget fruits and vegetables and a lot of other health details. And I don't think they look as healthy. And because almost everybody that tried living food diet haven't thrived. They don't manage to maintain the diets. They start losing a lot of weight. They start complaining about symptoms, and they start binging a lot of food. So if you're not controlling your food intake, what you eat, and having control of your health and your diet, you should be aware that you are not eating nutritious diets. So take a look at this pyramid. I love it. In the basis of the pyramid, there is the sweet fruits, and in the middle are the vegetables, the leafy vegetables, the fruit vegetables, and the cruciferous vegetables. What that means, fruit vegetables would be tomatoes or okra. Leafy greens, spinach or lettuce or celery. And cruciferous vegetables would be broccoli or kale, cauliflower. And then in the end, whatever you want in really small portions, like mushrooms, nuts and seeds, primarily or preferably fresh legumes like fresh peas, roots like carrots and beets, fresh corn, and even if you're not vegan, small amount of animal products like a blue zone, for example. There's these two pyramids that you can take a look and have an idea. So hygiene also focus on food combining, and there's a lecture on food combining here on the channel. You should watch it. It's a must. Do you want to know more about fasting and how to live a healthful life, or even raw vegan recipes? Hygienic Fasting, Nature Surgery, and the book Natural Delicacies, Cooking Without a Stove are available on Amazon, and Hygienic Fasting is actually available on print on demand, so you can receive it at your home. But I also have 8 books published, 6 online courses, retreats here in Brazil, and I attend patients online in private sessions. Unfortunately, all the other books and the online courses are still only available in Portuguese. But if you want my help as a nutritionist, or even if you want to come to a retreat in Brazil, just sign up. The contact will be on the website and in the links below. And please don't forget to subscribe, hit the bell button for notifications, comment, share the video. If you do all those, you are going to help the channel to grow. And if we grow, you grow together, getting more vital, life-changing information so you can help yourself and others to make this a more healthy and better planet for all of us. Food combining was a really important part of natural hygiene back then in Shelton's era. Herbert Shelton was the main pioneer in natural hygiene. But nowadays, in my humble opinion, I would pay a lot more attention to other parts of natural hygiene, like chrononutrition and chronobiology is so underestimated and is so much more important than food combining. For sure, it helps a lot, and I think you should watch the whole lecture on food combining here on the channel. I'll put the link on the description, but you can also search on the channel for food combining. But if you are with a failing digestion, with a sick digestion, if your stomach, if your intestines is not healthy, for sure food combining will help. Even if you are healthy, food combining can play a part, yes, but exercise will play a lot more. Sunshine will play a lot more. Sleeping will play a lot more. So people overestimate food combining, in my humble opinion, and underestimate the other healthful living parts. But we usually separate food combining in the modern hygiene diet because in the Shelton's era, they were still eating cooked foods. So we called modern hygiene because from the 70s, 80s, since the 90s, we started like paying more attention to a fruitarian diet, to a frugivore diet. So fruits would be classified as sweets, semi-acid, and acids. So bananas, papayas, and oranges, for example. I'll ask Murillo, I'll ask the editor, please put a food combining chart over here as well. So there are the vegetables, as I said, the fruit vegetables, the tender vegetables, and the cruciferous vegetables. And there's also the fats. There are the fatty fruits like avocados or coconuts. There are the nuts and seeds and the other foods. So the best rule in food combining is combining very little, trying to make more monomeal or close to monomeal, or introducing as most as 5 foods in one meal. But if you can eat sequentially, one food at a time, even if you eat 2, 3, or 4 foods, I think that would be ideal. There are more details to it, so I suggest you to watch the whole video. So the other thing that people usually don't understand is the difference from the tuberous roots, from the tubers to the bulbs. So as this graphic shows, this is the beets. So the tuberous roots, if it's a root, it usually has a lot of simple carbohydrates. That's why we beets and carrots, because they provide the sweet taste. Nobody grates potato on their salad raw, maybe cooked, but not raw. Why? Because the potato, the tuber, does only have complex carbohydrates. The beets have complex and simple carbohydrates. So that's why it's sweet to the tip of your tongue, but it's not as sweet or not as juicy and moisty and soft as a fruit. So that is the difference. The tuber roots have simple, half complex carbohydrates. The tubers has only complex carbohydrates. And there are the bulbs. Another thing that a lot of people are not aware is that legumes is a good food in a frugivore diet. What, Eduardo? Yes. If you don't want to eat a lot of vegetables and a lot of nuts and seeds, or to be in the safe side of protein intake, to be on the safe side of the diet in general, I believe in introducing some fresh legumes once in a while at least. You can sprout some, yes, for sure, but fresh would be better. So you can take a look at this image, is actually fresh peas. So fresh peas out of the pod, even more if it's the sweet pea, it's really tasty. Is it good as fruit? No, for sure not. It's not as good as fruit, but it's really valuable food in a frugivore diet, in a raw food diet. The legumes are actually the staple foods for the blue zones. In the nutritional science, they are really one of the bombs in terms of nutrition. So do I think they get too ripe? Yes. I think fruits and vegetables are way more important than legumes, that's for sure. But to include some legumes, even if it's once in a while, nowadays I include every day some legumes to not lose weight and to look a little bit more bulky, because they have a lot more protein and a lot more calories than fruits and vegetables. So you get a different body composition with them. So I have a whole book on Portuguese with sprouted legumes, grains, etc. recipes for people that want to gain muscle on a raw food diet. But the main thing is that the fresh legumes is way much better than sprouted legumes, because it still has the nature's water and doesn't have a lot of the anti-nutrients that are formed while the drying process happens. So I have eaten, for example, fresh soy, edamame, I have eaten fresh peas, even fresh chickpeas from the garden, and it's actually really tasty. And there's the last category, I think the least healthy category, it would be grains. What most people don't understand is the legumes grows in, I actually don't know the name in English. You can maybe find for me or comment below. So here in Brazil, we call bagas. The translation would be berries. But beans grow in pods. I think pods would be the right naming, right? The bean pods, it's different than the grain plants. So a lot of people mix grains and legumes, but legumes are beans, soy, lentils, chickpeas, and grains are rice, oats, barley, and there's also the pseudo grains like quinoa, amaranth, buckwheat. That's what you most realize it. The nutrition in grains are way much different in terms of proportions to the nutrition in beans. So in my humble opinion, beans are way more healthy than grains, but still, you can use both in a raw food diet, but beans would be more, not just healthy, but actually more tastier, right? Less starchy when you sprout it. But grains grow in grass seeds. You can see that the bird is actually on the grass. So if you want to use some sprouts, I would highly recommend it using legumes instead of grains. So what about the seasons? I think one of the things that we still don't have scientific data on it, but we will maybe have it in the future, is actually about the seasons. Spring and summer, there are the sweeter fruits, the most hydrating fruits. I would think that human beings would be eating more sweet fruits, more really high water content fruits like watermelons, a lot less fats, and would maybe have even less necessity for vegetables. But when winter comes, we would be eating more vegetables, nuts and seeds, more citrus fruits, because citrus fruits and nuts and seeds and a lot of vegetables grow way much better during winter. And maybe even some legumes, because legumes can be eaten raw by human beings in nature only when they're fresh. So the main thing is pay attention to the seasons, not just because of the taste of the fruit is better, but the quality of the nutrition will also be better. And also, in my humble opinion, even the macronutrient ratios that they provide will be different. You can see that citrus fruits usually have a little bit more protein. The nuts and seeds have more fat and protein. The vegetables that usually grow better in winter have more protein, so would be a balance in nature in terms of caloric intake, in terms of the food, in terms of macronutrients. I think we will still discover science behind it, but fruitarianism. What is fruitarianism? It's the concept that human beings should be living on fruits exclusively. And I don't buy into that. When I started raw food diets almost 18 years ago, I only saw websites, and I haven't found Doug Graham yet with Food and Sport. I have only found websites sending me to fruitarianism. And I felt like the living food diet and fruitarianism, and I felt like, no. Living food diet is too complex. Oils, too much preparation, blenders, food processors, dehydrators, a lot of sprouting. The food would take forever to make, and the people were like really thin, like some cult or religion. And in the other hand, there were people talking about living on fruits. And I felt like, no, fruit only diet, it probably doesn't work, right? But, I didn't know how to prepare all these living food dishes. I didn't know how to eat it. So I felt like maybe at least I knew how to eat fruit. And fruits is tastier, it's easier, it's simpler, it's more simple. So I started eating a lot of fruit, but I didn't have a taste for vegetables back then. So I spent primarily the first 2 months almost on a fruit-based diet, or eating almost only fruits. When I was really going nuts for salty foods, or for not understanding that I was under eating a lot, and that's one of the most common mistakes that people do in raw food diet. They under eat because I was not used to the amount of fiber and volume and chewing that you have to do in a raw food diet. So I started losing a lot of weight, but I was living primarily on fruits. And in the weekends, I always ate some cooked food because I was like, going crazy without calories. because I was exercising before that and for some time along that for like 2 hours per day, lifting weights and swimming. And I was really bulky back then because I was eating a lot of meats and lifting weights. I was almost lifting 90 kilos on a bench press. So that requires a lot of calories because of a lot of muscle. So what we have to realize it is that there's no fruitarian animals in nature. There are frugivore animals, but no fruitarian animals. So there's the chimps, the bonobos, the gorillas. They eat a lot of fruits, but they eat a lot of vegetables as well. But none of them live on only fruits. Maybe a bat, there are bats that I think they live on fruits and flowers, but still, there's no animals that live only on fruits. Maybe the amount of fruit can be really high to the amount of vegetables, but still. So fruit is almost the perfect food, but it's not perfect. It doesn't have all the nutrients that we need. If you try an only fruit diet, you are going to die in the long run. Yes, unfortunately, fruits is like really healthy food, natural food, but you would die of malnutrition. You can see some cases of fruitarians in the last decade that were died because, trying to live on fruit only or almost on fruit only. So it doesn't mean we cannot go a few days on only fruits. And I have done that many times. But still, going on only fruit is different than doing fruit for a few days. And I don't recommend it, fruit only for a few days, because there's no need for it. A banana island, etc. There's no scientific data on it. It would be better to do a properly supervised water-only fasting, or a fasting mimicking diet, not the Walter Longo way because he used a lot of powder foods. There's many ways to do a semi-fast without trying to live on fruit only. But what matters, it's not the fruit itself, but the proportion of nutrients inside of it. You can try to eat primarily bananas for a while, and you see that you crave more vegetables and even maybe more nuts. But if you use watermelon or guava or apricots, some fruits that are more balanced in terms of macronutrients, you see that you need less vegetables. So that is a really important part of raw food nutrition. Paying attention to variety, you end up paying attention unintentionally but automatically to macronutrient intake. So the most important thing is eating a variety of foods, not just fruits, but of the other categories like vegetables, nuts and seeds, mushrooms, maybe algae as well. I nowadays, after my B12 deficiency, when I was 12 years a raw fooder, I went through a B12 deficiency and I included algae also in my diet. And also the nutritional reserves that you have also counts. If I'm living on fruit for a month, maybe a lot of the nutrients are going low. But if I'm eating a really balanced diet right now and I just ate fruit for a whole day today, that would be okay. That wouldn't be a big problem for your nutritional reserves. But I also think that vegetables play a huge part on health, and when you neuroadapt, when you become healthier after a few years in a raw food diet, you start liking vegetables a lot. People don't like vegetables because they're really sick. Their palate is perverted. They eat so much cooked food, they had so much bad habits throughout their whole lives that they cannot even enjoy. So vegetables not only provide more satiation, they provide more satiety, but also because of the volume, but also because of the micronutrients. So vegetables are more balanced in terms of macronutrients, in terms of micronutrients. So a diet may be based on fruit, but with high amounts of vegetables, higher than anybody out there are eating, it's important. That means, for example, I eat at least 500 grams of vegetables per day, maybe even more than that. And vegetables are the perfect equilibrium when you include them with the fruit. So how to balance your diet? It's pretty simple. If you think about it, you can use several different concepts. For example, eat a variety of colors. So we for sure prefer fruits in terms of palate, in terms of society, because fruits has more calories and is more sweet, secretes more dopamine, the pleasure hormone. So fruit will always be the preferred food. In talking about raw foods, when you don't cook it, you don't season it, you mix, you don't make anything different in the food, for sure, raw fruits will always taste better than any other raw food you can eat. But you can use several different concepts as trying different colors every day, trying different fruits and vegetables, nuts and seeds every day. But for sure, as I said, you have to include even some legumes and some algae. Bonobos have been seen jumping in the lake to harvest algae. So we don't know exactly what varieties of nutrients and foods we would eat in nature. But what we know scientifically is that chimpanzees can eat up to 130 different food items in the year. So usually people eat what? 10 food items a year, 20, maybe 30. So usually people eat what? 10 food items a year, 20, maybe 30. You know, they eat what? Rice, beans, potatoes, red meats, milk, eggs, you know, like there's wheat. There isn't much variety in the usual cooked food diet. But as raw fooders, we open ourselves to a lot more variety than we ever imagined. And the variety is important for different remedies, for different phytonutrients that act as remedies to the human body. So it's different phytonutrients, different fibers, different proportions of macronutrients, micronutrients. So variety is important, not just in the food group, but in different fruit groups. That means varieties of fruits in terms of berries, in terms of like bananas, apples, pears, watermelons, etc. But also in terms of vegetables, in terms of nuts and seeds, in terms of algae, legumes, in terms of mushrooms. I try to obtain variety from every fruit group that I eat. I don't eat usually grains, for example. I don't eat tubers almost never in 20 years. Probably ate some steamed tubers twice, 3 times, maybe 4 times in 20 years, maybe 10 times. I don't know, because I developed an online course that is based on steaming foods, just to help people out to obtain a better diet without making such a huge change. But besides that, I never steamed any tubers anymore. So what I want to say is, I think the best balance is close to 80-10-10. Doug Graham's talk about the 80-10-10 diet because we have a lot of clinical data and epidemiological data from the blue zones, from the research of Ornish, Elsowstein, McDougall, Campbell. All of them have been showing that the best proportion in terms of macronutrients would be 80-10-10. But for sure, if you eat a little bit more of nuts and seeds or avocados or coconuts, you go above the 10% of fats. 80-10-10 would be 80% carbohydrates, 10% of protein, 10% of fats. That would be easily obtained only with plant-based foods that are low in fats. For example, if you eat a lot of rice and beans, if you eat a lot of fruits and vegetables, if you eat some tubers or roots, any way you look at it, you end up getting the proportion of 80-10-10. But when you include just a small handful of nuts, because they're really high in calories and high in fats, you end up passing too much your fat intake for the day. So 80-10-10 would be the best. Yeah, for sure, the clinical data suggests that, but I think it's a little bit unrealistic for most people not eating a little bit more of nuts and seeds here and there. So I don't think it's a huge deal worrying too much about fat instead of worrying too much about exercise, sunshine, sleeping early, having good chrononutrition, chronobiology, and a lot of other things. But I emphasize more than 30% of your calories from fat is like too much. You can see even diabetes, insulin resistance happening even with plant-based fats. So there's good fats, there's bad fats, but anyway, too much fat is too much fat as well. But maybe 75, 10, 15, going up a little bit of the fat intake to the 15, even 20s would not be a huge deal, because the most important part of this raw food diet is the whole food, the fresh food, instead of, in my humble opinion, instead of a little bit more of fat intake. So you have to, I'm giving this lecture on nutrition so you can be more, have a whole perspective instead of a fragmented one. Because when we go into different diets, different lifestyles, etc., we get too much attached to the details. And the basics are usually forgotten. The basics, what would be the basics? Exercise, raw, fresh, whole food diet, sunshine, sleeping early, chronobiology and chrononutrition in terms of science matters way much more than a few percentage more of fat intake from nuts and seeds. There's even some debate on the best proportion, like if it's higher fat intake, like Furman suggests a higher fat intake from nuts and seeds because of the omega-3s, the omega-3 index, DHA and EPA. There's a lot of debate on it, but I highly recommend you to always eat a lot of fruits, a lot of fruit, a lot of vegetables, and a small amount of any kind of other raw foods that can be eaten raw, like nuts and seeds, a good source of fat, and good sources of minerals like algae and mushrooms, etc. So this would be the percentage of calories in a usual frugivore diet. I think maybe even a little bit less of fruits, or even a little bit more of vegetables or more fruit. It doesn't matter. What matters most, calories in a usual frugivore diet. I think maybe even a little bit less of fruits, or even a little bit more of vegetables or more fruit. It doesn't matter. What matters is along the week, month, and year. So take a look at the group of foods and the proportion of macronutrients. So what most people don't realize it is that the groups of foods have usually quite similar macronutrient profile. So if it's a grain, if you take all the grains, they usually would be around 80% carb, 8% fat, 13% protein. So when you are eating a grain, that is pretty much usually the amount you get of the macronutrients. But if it's, for example, a fruit, would be if you join all the fruits together in a bag and make a ratio of the proportion of macronutrients, would be 90% carb, 5% fat, 5% protein. So when you think about that, you understand that, for example, red meat, depending on the kind of meat, is not too much protein. It's actually more fat than protein. For example, ribs are 78% fat and just 22% protein. So the classification for the foods are usually wrong, but also if you just eat a lot of fruits and vegetables, nuts and seeds, and other plant foods, you end up in just moderate intake with the fatty foods, like 1 ounce, 2 ounces, like a handful, 2 handfuls, will be quite perfect proportion of macronutrients and micronutrients. But micronutrients also depends on the quality of the soil and how the food was harvested. So then we can talk about nuts and seeds. As I said, they're not as easy to find in nature because there is the season, there is lower availability compared to other plant foods, and there's also the shell. Because when we usually eat nuts and seeds, we just buy them in the store unhusked, without the shell. So that makes a lot of difference. If you try to break each nut and seed that you buy from the shell with like a nut breaker, you will notice that it takes like a long time to eat a lot of nuts and seeds. To overeat on fat, it takes a lot of effort. But bananas, it's just peeling. It's the peel easy opens to you. So that's why we should moderate these high energy density foods. We should focus more on high water content fruits. If you take a look even at primates, they use rocks to break the nuts and seeds. One thing that I learned but now changing the subject, how you know you are eating a highly dense, nutritious diet. One thing that I learned with Dr. Douglas Graham, and I praise him really much because of that, and I always teach as well, is whole, fresh, ripe, raw, organic plants. So that is ideal for good raw food nutrition. So fresh, raw is better than cooked. Fresh is better than dried. Whole is better than refined, processed. Organic, it's better than conventional. Plant foods are better than animal foods. And ripe foods is better than unripe foods. So you think of, for example, a banana. The banana is way more tasty and more nutritious when it's ripe. When it's hard and green, you can cook it for sure and eat it, but it will not be as good as the ripe banana because it takes a while for the plant to mature the food and also to put the nutrients in there and also in a bioavailable form. So, for example, whole food is better than refined food like brown rice or oranges instead of orange juice. So we can always take a look. If you get all these 6 parameters in your food, you can be pretty sure that your food is the best nutritious food you can find. But if I get only 5, for example, you can take a look at sugarcane juice. It's fresh, it's ripe, it's raw, it's vegetable, it's organic, it can be organic, but it's refined. So is it the best? No. But it's really good? Yes, for sure. But for sure, one of the main parts of that list, it's whole, right? So we have to keep in mind that. But for example, olive oil, it's not fresh, it's refined, possibly not ripe because the olives can be green instead of dark. It can be raw if it's cold pressed, and for sure it's from vegetable origin. So olive oil would be way less healthy, for example, comparing, but there's no comparison somewhat, to sugarcane juice because it is fresh and ripe as well. So the first part of nutrition that we have to pay attention to, raw instead of cooking. And this you can take a look at the spinach, look at the spinach raw and the spinach cooked. So we are talking too much about protein, but we are underestimating the water part. We are talking too much about protein and fats, etc. But water, it's the second most nutrient, second most vital nutrient out there. It's more important than anything. So part 2, whole foods. For sure, there is the least processed foods is better always. For example, look at this table. Grapes, raisins, grape juice. So minimally processed, moderately processed, highly processed. For example, wheat berries, whole grain bread, white flour. So we can always take a look and try to go to the source of the food instead of the least refined food or the most refined food. For sure, the least refined, the better, but instead of refined whatsoever, you can go to the whole food. Only eat foods as it appears in nature. That's my goal. Why? Because the processing of the food removes the fiber, the water, a lot of the nutrients, so it's more calories, less satiating, fewer nutrients. And probably if it's cooked, higher amount of Maillard reaction end products, cooked food toxins. So take a look at, for example, dried fruit, because a lot of people ask me that, like, but what about dried fruit? Can I eat it? And for sure, you can eat it. But is it perfect nutrition? Because we have to compare to what in nutrition? What you are comparing to? Oh, potatoes. Potatoes are really healthy. But compared to fruits and vegetables, they are not as healthy as fruits and vegetables, but they are more healthy than junk food. So in terms of nutrition, you have to ask, comparing to what? So dried fruit would be as healthy as fruit if the food doesn't spoil, if the food can be kept stored for months or even a year, you have to think about it. Other part is juices make you ingest more calories. And we don't want more calories. We want more nutrients with less calories. That's the key for society and for longevity and for long-term health. So in this research, in the journal Appetites in 2009, they showed that solid fruits affect satiety more than pureed fruits or juice, and that eating fruits at the start of the meal can reduce energy intake. So that's one of the things that I always teach my patients. eat the raw foods, the fruits and vegetables before the meal. So take a look at this. It's pretty impressive. Hyperphagia in rats produced by a mixture of fat and sugar. That means rats in laboratory, when they add fat and sugar, oil and refined sugar to the rat food, they end up eating 36% more food compared to the ones that didn't get extra salt and sugar in the food. And how much they end up gaining weight in the long run. So you have to think about it, caloric density and volume. That's one of the main things when you think about raw foods. Because take a look at this table. 400 calories of oil, 400 calories of chicken, 400 calories of vegetables. So when you eat plant-based food that is low in calories, high in water, you end up filling your stomach way before you get a lot of calories. So you maintain yourself lean and you end up maintaining yourself living a long life free of disease. So that's why in a raw food diet, we have to eat a lot more, because if you choose fruits and vegetables, they will be low in calories, high in fiber, high in water. So we can take a look at animals, for example. The sea otter, for example, can eat 1/3 of its weight daily. So how many bites per day of the food? That's what you should be thinking of, because a sea otter, for example, can eat 1/3 of its weight daily. Imagine eating 1/3 of your weight daily. So take a look at the caloric density of this table here. So green vegetables have 100 calories per 153 grams, but fruits have 250 calories per 153 grams. So fruits and vegetables are the lowest caloric dense foods on the planet. So you have to think about that when you choose, for example, oils or French fries. They are way more caloric dense even than meats, even than cheese or fish and eggs. Why? Because it's quite simple. The more calories you eat, the faster you age. So we want to eat a lot more raw food than we think we should to maintain our body weight, to maintain ourselves satisfied, but also not to gain weight and not to lose too much weight. There's always an equilibrium in terms of health. You don't want to be overweight, you don't want to be lower weight. There will be videos about BMI here in the channel pretty soon. There's already a video on how to lose weight. I suggest you to watch it, but the BMI would be preferable around 21, 22, even 23 if the person is really strong. So this picture is really funny because people usually when they binge food, even junk food, they end up thinking, they usually look around to see if somebody's looking at them. But your body is always looking at you. You cannot hide the damage that you cause to your body by eating junk food hidden. You can hide, but the food will cause the same impact to your physiology. So take good care of your temple. You don't have a second temple. If you ruin yours, you have to live in a slums instead of a mansion. So whole foods is the key for satiation. Why? Because the blood sugar will rise. So that's why usually mothers and grandmothers usually say, don't eat the sweets before the salty food, before the savory food, because you will lose your appetite. That's one of the beauties of fruits. If you eat fruits instead of junk sweet foods, you end up raising slightly your blood sugar, and that will tell your brain that you are satiated. Also, there are stomach distension receptors that actually tell your brain that your stomach has a lot of volume, that it has enough. So there is the quantity of the nutrients as well, because depending on the amount of the nutrients, you can be satiated or satiated. So nutrients also influence satiation. So there's also leptin, that is the anorexigenic hormone that inhibits the appetite. But there's ghrelin, the orexigenic hormone that stimulate appetite. So there's refining and caloric concentration that is abnormal. Take a look at this. 100 grams of raw potatoes would be around 58 calories. 100 grams of cooked potatoes would be 78 calories. 100 grams of French fries would be 170 calories. That means when you cook the raw food, you take the water out of it, you concentrate the calories. But when you cook it in oil, you end up taking out the water and adding oil to the food. That makes a lot more caloric. Another thing that we have to pay attention in terms of raw food diet is intermittent fasting. I will not talk too much about fasting on this lecture, besides recommending you to read Hygienic Fasting Nature Surgery on Amazon and watching the fasting videos here on the channel. But when you fast, you can easily help your body to go back to homeostasis. So we will help also to balance your own diet, your own hunger and satiety mechanisms. So other thing that we have to pay attention by natural hygiene is mono meals. Eating as simple as you can or one food at a time when you're hungry until you're full would be the best way, would be nature's way to eat it. Because no animal in nature mix their foods. If a chimpanzee walks into a banana tree, he will eat the bananas and then not carry the bananas around until he find mangoes, and then carry the bananas and the mangoes around until he find lettuce and tomato, and then makes a salad, you know? So it's way much better for digestion and for even satiation to eat as simple as you can, because there is now research suggesting what the old hygienists would say, that variety is the spice of gluttony, because they saw back then, 100 years ago or maybe more, that the more variety you eat, the more you indulge. You eat more than you need. But now there's research showing that if you are in a table and people keep bringing new dishes, you end up trying the new dishes because you want to try different things. So a mono meal, for example, would be a small watermelon, a half of a small watermelon would be like a small box of figs, like 10 to 12 figs. And you also have to think that the proportion of the salads for a raw fooder would be the same as the bowl of the salad for the whole family. You always have to think that raw vegetables, they have really low calories. So you have to, for them to count, you have to eat them in higher volumes. So the ripeness of the food also matters a lot, because when you try to eat unripe fruits, it tastes bland, it doesn't satiate you as much, it's terrible. But also when you try to eat overripe vegetables, it's also terrible. So cucumber must be really tender, or tomato, for example, must be really ripe. Watermelon must be somewhat ripe, but tender, not too overripe. But a banana must be really, really ripe to be really tasty and sweet. So it depends a lot on different food items. You have to keep learning by yourself when you adopt it, a raw food diet. So there's actually research showing that processed foods are way more addictive than raw foods, than natural foods, than whole foods. So you have to think about it. If you're having a hard time to drop those kind of foods, to drop processed foods and to adopt a raw food diet, actually addiction comes from oversecretion of dopamine. What Alan Goldhammer from True North Health Center suggested, it's the pleasure trap. And it's really a pleasure trap that happens when we end up tasting processed food, because it's hard to quit it. It's like a drug for the brain. If you want to take a look in Alan Goldhammer's interview, there's an interview with him in the channel. I suggest you to watch it. He's the main water supervisor in the world, and I highly recommend you watching his interview. But if you think about it, this image is quite funny. Do you think Mama Chimp or Mama Gorilla teaches her child must eat raw foods? No. The child always knows he has to eat raw foods. So there is non-climateric fruits, there are climateric fruits. And that's another thing that you have to pay attention for when choosing buying your fruits. Because the climateric fruits, they can ripe off the vine, off the tree. But the non-climateric fruits, they don't ripe any longer when they're picked. So you have to pick the ripe, the non-climateric fruits. And the climateric fruits like bananas or jackfruit, they can ripe off the tree. But for sure, there's an optimum range of ripeness to them to be picked. And I love this quote from Kalash News. It's not the natural foods doesn't have taste. It's the people who lost the palate, who lost the ability to sense it. And yes, when you eat a lot of junk food, when you eat a lot of salt, sugar, and when you smoke and drink and be merry, and when you do all these modern lifestyle behaviors, you end up losing the capacity to sense the subtle taste of natural food. And you need the taste of highly refined, highly concentrated, highly sugary and salty and fatty foods. So we can take a look even in chronic alcoholics. There are neuroadaptations that causes the abstinence of alcohol, bringing emotional negative state. For sure, the body is detoxing. When you eat a lot of crap, you end up in detoxing mode. And when you drop the drug of abuse, like cocaine or, junk food, you end up having a terrible mood. You end up feeling a lot worse. And overall, you end up having trouble. Because it's hard the abstinence, the withdrawal phase is quite hard. Because usually the brain indicates that he wants more of that substance again. So there's a lot of other things that we can talk about adopting a raw food diet. For example, sleep and circadian rhythms are important to make the changes in terms of diet. There's also, we can take a look at primatology, the science of studying primates. They show that primates eat fruits during the day and vegetables during the night. So to finish up, to sum it up, when diet is wrong, medicine is of no use. When diet is correct, medicine is of no need. An ancient Ayurvedic proverb. And I think that is highly, highly intelligent because lifestyle medicine, sunshine, exercise, sleep, diet is actually the real medicine. So first of all, if you like the video, you want to support our podcast, you want to support our channel to grow and keep teaching people health through healthful living, you can buy these two books on Amazon. And also, you can come to the retreats here in Saquarema in January, February, and July. And you can also schedule a consultation with me so I can help you out after 20 years of studying and refining and understanding and applying a raw food diet, not in my own life, but in the life of thousands of patients, readers, and followers. So if you like the video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, hit the bell button for notification, give it a thumbs up, comment below, and share the video, and click on these videos to know more.